Thanks for having me. I'm Sally Kenyon, Senior Lawyer at Justice Connect Homeless Law. I'll be presenting, as mentioned, with my colleague Sam Horman. Before we get started, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. For me, that's the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I recognise their unique cultural and spiritual relationships with the land and their rich contribution to our society. As a lawyer, I also want to acknowledge the disproportionate impact and marginalisation of First Nations people through our legal system. And despite that, First Nations people remain resilient and strong in the face of ongoing criminalisation and colonisation. Okay, so let's talk about the RTA. Before you run away at that list of legislation, we're really just going to focus on the top one there today, which is the Residential Tenancies Act. As Deb mentioned, in recent years, there have been some really major reforms to the RTA, which significantly strengthened protections for renters, particularly in relation to family violence. Those amendments also changed the language that we use. So now we refer to tenants as renters and to landlords as residential rental providers. So most tenancy disputes are heard in the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. So those laws and regulations also apply. And then where a property is public or community housing, what we collectively refer to as social housing, the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities Act also applies. So, I just realized that my slides are not changing. Sorry about that. Let's push through. Okay, that's working now. Okay, so what's covered under the RTA, basically? So the RTA contains laws which have circumstances for both family and personal violence. There are some differences in the way that the Act deals with them. Today, we're going to focus on what the options are for people experiencing family violence. So the RTA uses the same meanings under the Family Violence Protection Act and the Personal Safety Intervention Orders Act. So it relies on those definitions for what it covers. I'm not going to read them out to you for now. And so this is a broad list of what the RTA provides for in circumstances of family violence. So quickly to run through, victim survivors can make applications to change locks, to make particular safety modifications, to prevent open house inspections, to object to advertising photos or videos where it puts their safety at risk, to terminate a rental agreement and avoid costs associated with that, to reduce the term of a rental agreement, to terminate a rental agreement and then create a new one, to allow access for the removal of belongings. And VCAT can also make orders about distribution of bond, liability for rent, damage, maintenance costs, and or utilities in certain circumstances, which we'll go into a little bit more in a bit. You can also defend a possession order application, protect bond, or remove a renter or amend a tenancy database listing or blacklisting. So we're going to go through some of those options in a bit more detail. So the first two of those options involve making changes to a residential rental agreement. So the first one allows a renter to break a lease. So if they've experienced family violence, they can terminate a lease with reduced or no costs. For example, if someone has a 12-month lease, but they want to leave earlier, they'd normally have to pay lease breaking costs, reletting fees, etc. And then the second option is that a person who's a renter or who is not a renter under the rental agreement, but is living in the property as their principal place of residence, can apply to create a new rental agreement that's in just their name, removing a perpetrator or person using violence. This is a really particularly important provision when it comes to social housing. As Jess mentioned, affordability is a real issue for people who are looking to either stay at home without a person using violence or to move. But in social housing, because rent is adjusted according to household income, it makes it just more possible for someone to stay. So under these provisions, in circumstances of personal violence, an intervention order is required, but it's not required for family violence. There are gaps to these provisions. We've come a really long way, but there are gaps remaining. The main one is that where a person is unsafe to stay in their property, but the person using violence is not a party to the lease agreement, they can't apply to terminate the lease under these provisions. There are similar provisions which involve terminating a rental agreement due to hardship. And VCAT does consider violence to be hardship, but it doesn't give VCAT all of the same powers to make orders about those additional issues that I mentioned, like outstanding rent, utilities, bond. So if your client is in that position, we really recommend getting advice about the legal options that are open to them. So these applications are required to be listed by VCAT within 3 days. So it's a really good idea to get your client connected with legal advice as early as possible. This is a good time also to note that there are family violence workers at VCAT who are really helpful, particularly for providing those kind of practical support. So where hearings are in person, the workers can make arrangements to make it safe for your client to attend a hearing. They can also help if you need to serve an application on a person using violence, but the renter or client doesn't want to do that directly. They can help with those sort of service requirements. So I wanted to give you some examples of how these provisions can work in practice, because I understand it's a bit dry just reading you the legislation, but it's really important that you understand how these work in practice so that victim survivors have early access to information and they can make informed choices about what to do with their rental homes. It's also really important that you have this information early, because there are steps that you can take to prevent problems later on, and it's much easier to try and prevent those problems than to try and fix them. So for our case example, Pia is a co-renter on a residential rental agreement with her partner. Pia moved out of the property after her partner uses violence against her. And the ex-partner stays but stops paying rent. So because Pia has a wonderful caseworker who has advised her about her options, she's retained her keys, which is really important. And she applies to VCAT for an order terminating the agreement, which VCAT grants. Good to note there that if she hadn't retained her keys, there was a risk that VCAT would find that the tenancy had already terminated and she wouldn't have grounds to make that application. So as well as making an order terminating the agreement, VCAT can also make orders that the co-renter is responsible for the rent arrears which came about after Pia left. They can order that Pia does not have to pay the rental provider any compensation for the early termination of the agreement. Pia also can't be added to a tenancy database or blacklist in relation to any rent arrears or damage to the property. And they can also order arrangements for Pia to retrieve her belongings. So another example where a renter wants to stay safe in their home. So in this case, Drew has lived in public housing with their partner for 2 years, but the partner won't allow Drew to be on the rental agreement. Police are called to the property and the partner is issued with a family violence intervention order. Drew can then apply to VCAT to terminate the tenancy agreement and have a tenancy created that's just in their name. Drew can also ask VCAT to make orders that the ex-partner is responsible for the outstanding rent and about how the utility bills should be dealt with. And then Drew can make modifications to the property to help keep them safe, like changing the locks or installing security lights. In this case, it's really important that Drew would be eligible for public housing, even if they don't have a current VHR application. And also good to note that if this were a private rental, Drew could still make that application and could also ask VCAT to add somebody else onto the tenancy if they had a housemate or someone that would make the property more affordable for them. So we've talked a little bit about Drew making modifications to help keep them safe. So where victim survivors do choose to stay, they can make modifications to make it safer for them to remain in their home. The Act differentiates between modifications for which consent is not needed and those for which consent is needed. It's a bit complex. We've kind of given you some of the main options that are included there on the slide. So that lists the modifications which are most relevant to family or personal violence. If the consent is required but is refused, a renter can apply to VCAT for a determination that that refusal is unreasonable. Before a rental agreement terminates, the renter will usually be required to store the property to the original condition prior to any modifications. No additional bond can be requested where the renter and the RRP have agreed that the property doesn't need to be restored, or where the funding for the modification is provided by a funding scheme on the basis that it doesn't need to be restored and the rental provider has agreed to that. That's quite complex. It's great to get legal advice about these things, if possible, before you do them, so that you know what you're dealing with when it comes to the end of the rental agreement for your client. So another case example, as I mentioned briefly, under the RTA, a victim survivor can defend certain types of notices to vacate where the alleged conduct for which the notice is given was caused by a person using violence. So in this example, Riley has received a notice to vacate for repeatedly breaching her duties as a renter. Neighbours have complained that there's often yelling and loud noises coming from Riley's house. Riley tells you that her partner often screams at her and throws things. So Riley can apply to VCAT to challenge the notice to vacate on the basis that the conduct in question was caused by the act of a person who has subjected the renter to violence. It's really important to note that there is a time limit that applies to challenging a notice in this way. So we would really recommend connecting the renter with legal advice and assistance as early as possible. So there are some additional considerations for people experiencing family violence in public housing. So the first one on the list there is priority transfers. Generally, if a person can't transfer a property, if they no longer have an ongoing tenancy, you can't transfer a tenancy that doesn't exist. However, there's an exception for people experiencing family violence. So they can still be placed on the priority transfer list, even if they relinquish their property. So that means they're not having to pay rent for a property that it's not safe for them to stay in, but they can still be transferred as early as possible. There's also the temporary absence policies. So where someone is experiencing family violence, they can apply to have their rent rebated to $15 per week for up to 6 months, possibly longer, if they are in refuge accommodation or they can't return to the property due to risk of harm. All of these policies and procedures for public housing are publicly available, and community housing providers have their own internal policies. They're not often quite as robust as the DFFH policies, but they should have the same level of accountability. Okay, and so finally, there's just some options there for where to get tenancy help, a few of the different organisations and how to find your local community legal centre. That's the end of my section, so I'm going to pass you on to my wonderful colleague Sam Horman to introduce you to Home of Your Own.
Going on from Sally's presentation, I'm going to talk about a recent digital self-help tool that Justice Connect's Homeless Law team has launched, which is called Home of Your Own. It's been specifically designed for renters facing family violence, and I guess the original idea of it and kind of its broader purpose is to make those important protections under the RTA more accessible to renters and to people that support them, where family violence has impacted a tenancy. And I guess we see this as an important way that we can help people to understand their rights earlier. And as Sally mentioned before, some rental issues escalate and become harder to resolve. Part of the sort of the mission or the theory of change of Home of Your Own is also helping people to understand their rights so that they feel more confident and empowered to act on them in ways such as, seeking support or communicating with their rental provider about their needs. So I'll go through just a brief intro to Home of Your Own. If any of you are familiar with Justice Connect's Dear Landlord tool, you might see a few similar things in this presentation to Home of Your Own. I guess part of what the tool does is it steps users through a series of optional anonymous questions to then provide some personalized information in a huge range of scenarios based on, I guess, the issue that's occurring in the home and what the goal that the renter is trying to achieve is, and provides practical steps for them to stay in their home, leave their home safely and free of financial burden, or find a new place to go. Yeah, the tool also features a document generator at the moment. It can provide some customized letters that a renter can send to their rental provider to advocate for their safety needs and yeah, things such as the installation of security devices. So it's actually taking that first step towards acting on some of those rights that Sally was talking about. And then, of course, across the tool, we're connecting people to specialized assistance as well. Before I jump into a demonstration, I just want to acknowledge and thank the many survivor advocates who participated in the design of the tool, as well as a range of family violence and housing workers that also provided their feedback, some of whom may be listening into this webinar. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that this tool has been thoughtfully co-designed around the needs of the people who are going to be using it, and also thanking those people for their contribution. If you're looking to jump on the tool, there's a short URL here which will circulate afterwards. But yeah, I'm going to jump into a quick demo now. Cool. Can I just confirm that I'm sharing Chrome and people can see the Home of Your Own tool?
It's Deb speaking. That's yeah, it's got a yep, that's right. It's got a little box that's popped up about digital safety.
Amazing. Thanks, Deb. Cool. So yeah, as you can see, we do have a pop-up, which you know, generally people don't like pop-ups, but we thought it would be important to add a note about digital safety for users of this tool, including how to clear your browser history. And important note I would add as well is if you're recommending this tool to anybody who is concerned about their digital safety or whether they're being tracked online, we'd recommend creating a private browsing window to use the tool. So yeah, this is Home of Your Own, and I guess here on the homepage, you can see a bit of an introduction to what the tool can do for users. I'd point out, I guess, these 3 pink tiles as kind of a key way to understand what the tool can do. It asks, you know, what do you need help with? And we've organized all of the, you know, support and information available under, I guess, these 3 broader pathways of whether someone's looking to stay in the rental that they're in and make it safer. Potentially, you know, we can provide information there around avoiding eviction, what to do if there's damage or unpaid rent, and also those protections and options that Sally was talking about around removing someone from the lease and creating a new one in your name. We've got a pathway towards leaving a rental for those that have are forced to or have chosen to leave. There's information there about ending a lease and avoiding financial burden as a victim survivor of family violence, and what to do if there's damage or unpaid rent. Other things include getting your belongings back after eviction and keeping a clear rental history, as we know that blacklisting is a practice that can really unfairly impact victim survivors when they're applying for new homes. We also have some information about getting a new home, the majority of which helps people to understand the range of housing support available and where the best place to reach out or seek support in their circumstance. I won't go too far down the homepage, but I would just like to point out this neat animated video that we have, which provides a really accessible introduction to family violence and renting, as well as a little overview of what the tool can do. So yeah, if you're sort of showing this to anyone, or you just like to get a better idea yourself, it's probably a good place to look. Okay, I will quickly just go through the tool, but I will also point out some of the safety features at the top. As you can see, a quick exit button, and also this little button that brings up some emergency information and that digital safety info in case you should need it. So we'll imagine someone who's looking to stay in their home now, and we'll go down this staying in a rental path. After a quick disclaimer and consent, you can see that the tool is basically stepping someone through some questions and providing some contextual info around why the questions are being asked. So let's imagine that this person isn't being asked to leave, and they are sharing a rental agreement with the person using violence. And they're primarily interested in changing the lease to remove somebody and making the home safer by installing some security features. Got another digital safety reminder there. Cool. So after stepping through some of those questions, what users will see is a summary of their rights and options under these little folder accordions, and also a summary of support available that we've organized under these 4 types of services. I won't go too deep into these, but basically what you can find in here is a practical summary of what someone's rights are, what they might be able to, what they might be protected to do, and where to seek support, or what first steps they can take to, achieving that goal, whether it might be creating a new rental agreement or changing the locks. I just point out as well that we do have a print page button here, which creates sort of a summary document of all that info if you're supporting someone and that's helpful to you or them. I'll continue into this window here, installing safety devices, which, yeah, as you can see, is the summary of info there. But this one also features the option to draft a letter to talk to the rental provider about discussing these safety modifications. And as Sally pointed out, where consent from them is necessary, it also helps to request that consent so that the renter can go ahead and install the devices they need. So I'll just demonstrate how this works quickly. So yeah, let's imagine this person doesn't need to change the locks, but there are other things they want to install. We'll make sure that they're legally protected to do that. And here we can just confirm what they're interested in having installed to the home. Just going to fill out some dummy answers because I've got one pre-filled. Here we provide the option to add some personal details to the message, but an important principle with the tool is that we don't want users to have to provide any personal info, so this is completely optional. But if it does populate the letter that's being generated if any of this detail is provided, but users can also go ahead and just skip this, which is what I'll do. Although I'll just point out here an important feature. If we tick this box, we can have the personalized letter sent to the email address that is entered. So that if someone's looking to generate an email to send to their rental provider, they can easily just receive it in their inbox. Okay, so yeah, here on this page, there's some further information about getting support to pay for safety modifications, and a reminder of their obligations or rights under the law. they can download the letter that's been generated, and there's some instructions on how to use it. As I said, I've made one before, so I've got it here open to demonstrate how it appears in an email. So some instructions here, and then, yeah, you can get an idea of the document that's generated. So we've got a letter to the rental provider acknowledging that they have some safety and privacy needs. Family violence has occurred in the home. So there's a note in there requesting privacy around information that they share, and the request to make those safety modifications around the alarm system and a secure letterbox. So I guess our hope or ambition with something like this is that it provides the language and the confidence that someone may need to take a step where, you know, they may not have support, or an accessible way of comprehending their options under the RTA. That's pretty much it for the tour. The very last thing I'll touch on is we've also organized all of this info under more of a browsable format. So if you hit the browse button up the top, you can also just find a summary of the information similar to which Sally has shared in Home of Your Own by, clicking through a regular page like this, which was something that we designed for people who are coming back to the site, and also for workers who are just looking to understand some information to pass on to their clients. I'll end the preso there. Thanks for having us talk about Home of Your Own, and we'll circulate some info afterwards around how to access it and share it with your networks of clients if that's something you're interested in doing.